So I guess we start with this. What is Jewish dress? And why talk about it at a time like this? Is it frivolous? Is it really not what we should be talking about? Should we be talking about plagues and viruses, which is not a bad thing? Maybe we should talk about it. But I've never thought of dress as being frivolous. I've never thought of it as being something that we shouldn't talk about. I don't know if it's because I grew up in New York a lot of my childhood and shopping was a huge part of my existence, but I've always found clothing fascinating and the way what you wear makes you feel a certain way. It says something about you, regardless if you want it to or not. What you're wearing sends out a message loud and clear. And it's really, despite the fact that people will say, like, it's not that important to me and it doesn't really matter, this is the first thing people see about you. And this is what they'll always see, unless they're beyond that, they're above that. But most people see what you wear. And I'm going to start with my first image. And I think this image is what really inspires me to really talk about Jews and Jewish dress. The question is like, what's going on here? Who are these people? When do they exist? When do they live? And when I teach this to an audience, I get a lot of different responses. People say anything from like 1880 to 1930s. They say Jews, they say Romanians, they say, like, choose an ethnic group, and they're going to say that's what it is. But the truth is, I could tell you who they are because this is my family, and I adore this picture, and I'm so grateful that we have it. So many families have lost pictures over the years for a myriad of circumstances, and to have this is really valuable. So what we're looking at here is this little baby here is my grandfather. And the year is 1920 or 21, probably 1921 because he was born in December of 1920. And this is, he looks like he's maybe a month or two old. No, he's holding himself up. So maybe a little bit older. So this is my grandfather, Tzvi. This is his sister, Geula. This is his mother, Tzipora, and his father, Abraham. And then, no, I take that back. His father's name was Shimon. And this is Tzippora's mother, Baba Chana. And this is her mother, Baba Simcha. And what we're looking at is 4 generations of Jews living in the land of Israel, then called, Palestine, in 1921. And what we're seeing is a generational shift. We're seeing the oldest generation, Baba Simcha, who lived to the age of 106. I'm hoping I have those genes. Really very, very orthodox in her dress. She's got this kerchief that's really covering every hair on her head. She's got an apron on. She's really very, very modest. This is her daughter, Hannah. And Hannah is also wearing a kerchief, but you could see a little bit more of her hair. And she's a little more modern. And then this is Hannah's daughter, Tzipora, and Tzipora isn't wearing a hair covering, and she's wearing a very stylish dress for the time. And their husbands are similar. This, my great-great-grandfather, has a long beard. His son-in-law doesn't have a beard at all, though with age he will grow a beard. We'll see pictures of him when he's older and he has a beard. And then his son didn't wear a kippah. And we see this way that dress is telling us about these Jews and how they evolve. They go from one place of being, and their dress is very representative of that. And we're going to get to this at the very end of discussing Jews and Jewish dress, but I just want to show where the whole idea started. But let's talk about the original. The first time we discussed Jewish dress, Jews or not Jews, but dress in the Bible, is with this. Oh my goodness, it is, the most important time we talk about dress or the lack thereof. This is a real close up of Adam and Eve. The snake gives it away, and the snake is biting into the fruit. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we know that there's a huge thing to do with dress. My two favorite subjects, which are food and dress, happen in one of the first scenes in the Bible, and I think that's amazing. What we have is Adam and Eve. There's the sin connected with eating this forbidden fruit, and all of a sudden they notice that they're unclothed. And it's this incredible moment in the story, the narrative of what it is to be a Jew. So, for those of you who are just tuning in, I guess let me introduce myself. My name's Ilana Epstein, and I work for Jewish Futures and the United Synagogue. I'm really privileged to be an educator here in London. And I find my inspiration and where I want to be, what I want to be talking about in culture, in Jewish culture specifically, and how to cover up this moment of being unclothed. So we start the Bible here, and when the Bible talks to us about clothing, it uses the Hebrew word beged. So all Hebrew words have something called a shoresh, a root. So what is the root of the word beged? It's the same root as the word bagad, which means to deceive. So interestingly, the Bible seems to have this prejudice against clothing. It uses the same word for deception and clothing. And I think there's a big lesson to be learned from there. You can deceive people with the way you dress, or you could be yourself, but it's in your hands. So let's look at, did these early Hebrews dress differently to those people around them? So these are two different, one is a wall painting, the other one is from the Black Obelisk. Both are found at the British Museum. The painting that you see of the men in white prostrating themselves is from a tomb drawing from Thebes from about the year 1500 before the Common Era. The other one, the Black Obelisk, which looks like a relief, that is the Black Obelisk that tells the story of the capture of different nations as they're moved to Assyria. And we have reason to believe that this is a nation that comes from around the area of ancient Israel that's being taken into slavery. And we have other drawings from the time. And are these people different to the way they portray Jews or Hebrews? No, they're not. They're dressed the same, but one or two things that we can pick up from these are what they're wearing, which is interesting to us because we learn a lot about clothing from here. They seem to be wearing something like a sari in the white mural that's on the grave. You see they're wrapped over and over. You can see the line that goes through the sari. Here you can see these lines that go around, and we know from the Bible there are very limited amounts of words for clothing. There's kutonet, which seems to refer to a robe or a dress. There's this wrapping thing that goes over that, and you can see it here again. There seems to be an underlayer and an overlayer. And what I want to point out to you is the fringes of this clothing. You could see that in this one, the artist highlighted the edges of each fold of fabric, and here the artist in stone makes a point of edging the material that these men who are actually being marched into slavery are wearing. And the reason I want to point this out to you is because this is an era without ways of embellishing your clothing. To embellish your clothing would have been really, really challenging to get this going. Less so for those who can't afford it. So many people would have had unadorned clothing in very basic colors like off-white from wool or brown from other wool. Like that was it. There wasn't much. So what do you do if you want to, embellish your clothing? You actually just do the edges because the edges could be removed. So while you launder the entire fabric, you can actually take the embellishment off. You can pause, let's say, and stop what you're doing to remove the embellishment, wash the item without ruining this embellishment that you had, maybe gems on it, maybe dyes, maybe threads of gold and silver. And then once the item was laundered, you can sew it back on. And that's just the way they did it. We'll get back to why this is important, but let's go back to one of our themes. In the Bible, we discuss a lot beged. Beged is the Hebrew word for clothing. It's also very similar to the Hebrew word for bagad, which means to deceive. And one of our stories of clothing and deception is the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and he's known for a lot of things, but there's this really interesting story where we have this big challenge. Yehuda's daughter-in-law, Tamar, is married to his first son, and he dies. She then marries his second son, and he dies also. He has a third son, and basically he refuses to marry Tamar off to his third son, thinking she's a little bit of a black widow. I don't really want her marrying my third son and him dying. But she has this, maybe an epiphany, or is it a prophecy that tells her that she needs to marry one of Yehuda's sons, or perhaps Yehuda himself, in order to have a child who will carry on the legacy of Yehuda. But he says absolutely not. So she dresses up as a prostitute. She sees Yehuda himself returning from the field, and she basically seduces him. After the seduction, he says, well, I don't have money to pay you, but I'd like to. And she says, that's fine. Leave me your signet ring and leave me your staff, and I'll hold on to them as collateral. And when you come back with the payment, we'll exchange. So he gives her the signet ring and the staff, and she promptly disappears. She reappears pregnant, and Yehuda says, well, she should be tried and convicted because she slept with someone. She's obviously pregnant. And she then pulls out his staff and his ring, and she shows him that it was him who impregnated her. And she deceives him by dressing up as a prostitute. Our next area of deception is the story of Isaac and Esau. In order to get this blessing from his father Isaac, Rebekah tells Jacob to dress up as his brother Esau. So he puts on sleeves made of fur, and he basically pretends to be someone he isn't. So, in that pretense, he is once more deceiving someone else. And this keeps on happening throughout the Bible. So we see that this thing just doesn't stop. And it just keeps on happening. For those of you watching, we're not going to refresh the page. It's just going to continue as it is. So now we're going to move on to the next picture. This is Jacob and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I love this. How many of us believed that Jacob is actually wearing a multicolored coat? Thank you, Andrew Lloyd Webber, because we all believe it. But the Torah doesn't say multicolored coat. The Torah says kutonet pasim, a coat of stripes, not colors. When the Torah gets translated into Greek, they translate it as multicolored. It's multi-striped. Andrew Lloyd Webber, thank you Donny Osmond and Jason Donovan for wearing the coats so well, then takes this to a whole new level, a level where there's multicolored. But we just discussed earlier that's really hard to get multicolored in the land of Canaan during this time. The colors were really limited probably to black and white, or off black and off white. That's what they're wearing, and that is it. What were the brothers jealous about if it's just a black and white coat? What they may have been jealous of, what we read in one of our commentators, is that what they're jealous of is that probably the coat had long sleeves. Now, that doesn't seem something worth being jealous about, but it is when you consider that these men are shepherds. The last thing you need as a shepherd in the land of Canaan is a long sleeve coat. It gets in the way. The first thing you do when you wash your hands and sing happy birthday is roll up your sleeves. As you roll up your sleeves, you do it because long sleeves get in the way. And the brothers were jealous of their father making Joseph more important by giving him a coat that maybe made it difficult for him to work with his hands, because maybe he wasn't expected to work with his hands. And once again, the coat leads to an understanding. It signifies something, as clothing always does. The next one is we have Mordechai and Haman. Purim just passed. Pesach is on its way. And what we're looking at is, once again, clothing plays its part. We have Mordechai dressed in the clothing of the king, where moments before he's dressed in sackcloth. And we have Haman, who suggests this clothing because he wants to tell everyone he's as important as the king, and therefore he's dressing as the king. And we see clothing always playing its part. It's always there. It's always important. And that's something that we need to be aware of. And the Bible does use clothing in this fashion. All right, I'm going to pause to refresh my page and see if that helps. All right, we're refreshed. Very good. We're going to go on to our next image, which is this. So what does the Torah actually say about clothing, rather than this deception, which is what we're deriving from the story? What the Torah does say is limited. It tells us that men need to wear tzitzit, which are fringes on garments that have four corners, and they have to wear tefillin, which are these phylacteries. Did I say that right? I don't know. But the tzitzit is really interesting because the tzitzit need to have a thread of blue, tchelet. And we just said that actually getting colors is really challenging. Getting a dye is really important. It's reserved for royalty. The average Joe couldn't get this much blue for the thread that goes on the tzitzit. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has an outfit made entirely of blue because he is that important. But the average Joe, the average Jew walking in the street doesn't merit that importance, and yet he also is told to put a thread of blue in his tzitzit. And what that tells us is this tether that you don't need to be royalty, you don't need to be the high priest or the head of the church to have a connection with God. Everyone has a connection with God. We are tethered to Him through this fringe. We have a part of the Shema, which is a really important prayer in Judaism. We say it often. We, in fact, say it 3 times a day. And there's a whole chapter on tzitzit. And yet, women are also obliged to say it, but we don't wear tzitzit. But what we're connecting to is possibly that thread of blue that's in the tzitzit, that tether between us and God. And that blue reminds us that in our own eyes and in God's eyes, we're royalty. We're important enough to have this direct connection. And the connection happens in that blue, that really important blue of royalty. This is Tertullian, an interesting guy to bring into talk about Jewish dress. Tertullian is one of the church fathers. He starts in Egypt around the year 100 of the Common Era, and he says the way you can distinguish the Jewish women from the new Christians is that the Jewish women cover their hair, the married Jewish women. I get this question a lot, and this is not what we're really here to do. What we get is Jewish women covering their hair with wigs from as far back as you can remember. Really, there are sources discussing wigs in the Talmud. And in case you didn't think wigs existed, check this out. This is a tomb drawing from Thebes from the year 1500 before the Common Era, and those look a lot like wigs. Not a wig I would necessarily wear. Black is not my color, but they are wearing wigs, which is really, really cool. So wigs have been around forever, or nearly forever, for a really, really long time. But moving right along, let's take you to the Middle Ages. And with the Middle Ages, what we have is how do Jews dress in Europe? And we're going to focus on Europe. We have some written commentaries that we have the church elders telling people don't dress like the Jews. The Jews dress lavishly. And what we have here is from a Haggadah, which we're going to read soon on Pesach, from Spain, and from the early Middle Ages. And you see this woman has this gold headband, very big gold buttons. The man is wearing this beautiful, like embroidered cloak. And even the servant, who is made drastically smaller, also has embroidery. So the chances are, definitely for festivals, Jews were kitting themselves out in this finery. But things get progressively worse for the Jews, especially during the Inquisition. Things get, not Inquisition, sorry, during the Middle Ages, we start with the Crusade. We will get to the Inquisition, but the Crusades are a turning point for Jewish-Christian relations in the Middle Ages in Europe. And we have this comes out from the church in 1215 during the Fourth Lateran Council. This new law emerges. In some provinces, a difference in dress distinguishes the Jews or Saracens from the Christians, but in certain others, such a confusion has grown up that they cannot be distinguished by any difference. Thus it happens at times that through error, Christians have relations with the women of Jews or Saracens, and Jews and Saracens with Christian women. Therefore, that they may not, under pretext of error of this sort, excuse themselves in the future for the excess of such prohibited intercourse, we decree that such Jews and Saracens of both sexes in every Christian province and at all times shall be marked off in the eyes of the public from other peoples through the character of their dress, particularly since it may be read in the writings of Moses that this very law has been enjoined upon them. Oh my God, so much going on here. Basically, the church is really challenged. We can't tell the Jews apart. They look just like us and they dress just like us. How are we going to distinguish between the Jews and the non Jews, or rather, the Jews and the Christians? We don't want, God forbid, to have, Jewish Christian babies. This is not a good thing. So let's keep them apart. How are we going to keep them apart? We're going to put symbols on them, find a way to distinguish them in every Christian country. And what the church says is this is a law that the Jews already know. And the law that they're referring to is that idea of not copying the non-Jews. Chukat Agoim, it's called. And from this point forward, we see a lot of art that points out how Jews are distinguished. So this is a painting from France, and what we're looking at are these circles that are put to identify the Jews from the non-Jews with no circles. This is the expulsion of the Jews from France. So how are you going to show this? You're going to show the French king expelling, not very forcefully from his hand, but he was, the Jews. And how are we going to distinguish the Jews? By this round circle. And this is how we're going to expel the Jews. This isn't just France, this is in Spain. How are you going to show that the Jews were involved in the crucifixion? You have a Jewish man and a Jewish woman with this round circle, and they're kind of pushing behind people carrying the cross. So we've just given you an entire message with very little symbolism needed in order to point out who is the Jew in the image. Another one, this is still up. This is a church in Barcelona, and here we learn how are we going to distinguish Jewish women. We're going to put the symbol not where you would usually expect it, which is on the front and the back of the clothing, but rather smack in the middle of the forehead. And this is as humiliating as it gets. Jewish women would have had to wear this symbol of their Jewishness as a mark, maybe the mark of Cain, I don't know, on their forehead. And I can't think of anything more humiliating than this. This is from a church in Mantua. This is Daniel Nosta and his wife and son. And what happens is when Daniel Nosta moves into his home in Mantua, he finds a wall, a fresco of Jesus and his mother, and he paints over it. It's his home. You would expect that he could paint over it. As punishment for painting over this mural in his home, the church leaders make him donate a massive amount of money to repaint the same scene in the church and to put himself and his family underneath with their Jewish symbol that identifies them as the Jews who had to pay for this mural that went up in the church. Oh my goodness. For those of you who think that England was beyond this and above this, it so wasn't. What we read is that in England, during the 1200s, Jews would have to wear a symbol of their Judaism in the form of two tablets, reminiscent of the tablets that Moses brings down from Sinai. We know they had to be made of white parchment or white linen. They had to be 7 fingers high by 3 fingers wide, and they had to be sewn on the front and the back of their clothing. Any child, Jewish child over the age of 7 needed to wear this symbol of their Judaism. And this is pretty much as degrading as it gets. Like it couldn't get much worse. The symbol continues on and on. These are two etchings from Frankfurt in the year 1700. And here you have a Jewish man, and he's carrying more than just this round symbol of his Judaism. He's also got a money bag in one hand and garlic in the other, because it was said, and that I talk about food a lot, so Jews do use a lot of garlic and onions in their food, but the Jews smelled of it, and all Jews were thought to be money lenders, so that's why he's got a bag of money. This one is a Jewish woman, and she's got, again, this symbol of her Judaism, and she's holding a goose because Jews were known to be these big, cultivators. Is cultivators the right word? They had geese, and they're the ones who are fattening up the geese and then slaughtering them for their fat, their schmaltz, and for their livers, goose liver, and their meat. So this is very much all about the Jewish view. How do you see them? The symbol continues, unfortunately, until the Nazis bring it back. There was not long of a pause in this. Between the mid 1800s to the 1940, we have a pause of no symbols. The Nazis bring it back. This is a wedding in Amsterdam, where you could see everyone's wearing, ooh, we went too far, the Jewish star. And sadly, and I don't know why this one gets me all the time, you can see that the bride is covering her shoulder, and one could only guess that she's covering the star that would have been put on her wedding dress with the flowers. Oh my goodness, so sad. Jews are forced into wearing these symbols of their Judaism, but they're positive symbols as well in the Middle Ages. And there's something called the Jewish hat. The Jewish hat is really what Jews choose to wear. The Jewish symbol is what they're forced to wear. The hat is their choice. The less they wear the hat, the more countries insist on the symbol, because the hat distinguishes them. It's when they take off the hat that the symbol comes into play. And this, as you can read, is the prophet Yoel. This is in a church in France, and the year is 1029, I believe. It's really, really early. Another hat, but this is a very anti-Semitic drawing. This is a doodle on the pages of accounts in Britain, and we have here is Moses Moki. Moses Moki is wearing the Jewish hat. This is a Norman version of the Jewish hat. And Moses Moki is the chief money lender, and this is his wife, Abigail. And you have the devil between them, and he's pointing at their noses. Again, we're coming up with all these symbols of Judaism, and he's really not viewed very positively at all. You have the scales here with the money. It's not hard to see what's going on. And this here is Isaac of Norwich. Isaac of Norwich was said to be the most affluent man in Britain, the richest man, and he's wearing the crown, because Isaac of Norwich was the biggest money lender to the king, and Moses Moki was his collector. And he's not just two-faced, he's three-faced. They really didn't like him. But what I'm showing you here is actually the Jewish hat. Here's another one with the Jewish hat. This is the prophet Yoel again. This is in a church in Winchester. And this is Suskind the troubadour. Suskind the troubadour is said to have converted to Judaism, and unlike the Christians in the painting, he's put on the Jewish hat. Our last Jewish hat is this one. It's in the coat of arms. It's hard to see here. It's very blurry. But Jews saw the Jewish hat as something with a lot of pride. And they even use it in their coat of arms. And it's really beautiful that they do. We're gonna stop here with our few last images, which is just gonna wrap up the Middle Ages. Jews start dressing like others around them. And on Shabbat, they don't. And in Germany, they come up with all these different bits of clothing that are specifically for Jews. From this hat over here to this winged headdress to what's called a shulmantel, which you see here. Um, and they come up with this whole plethora of different clothing that's really, really specific to Jews, and they wear them to synagogue. So this is what a typical Jew would wear to the synagogue, and you have this hat, and it's reminiscent of a mortarboard that people used to wear in universities. It was a sign of scholarship, and Jews say this is an okay thing to copy from the non-Jews. It's a sign of being a scholar, and from this point forward, Jews in Germany wear it to synagogue for something like 200 years. The collar you see here, this ruff, is actually something that is very popular during the time of the Spanish inquisitors and Holland, and you see it in a lot of paintings, but long after it's gone out of fashion in the secular world, you see Jews wearing it. Because once more, it was a sign of finesse and refinement, that you were separating your mind from your body. And the collar was this incredible separation. It was white and starched, and Jews would wear it once more to synagogue. The shulmantel, which is our last bit of clothing that we're discussing, was a coat. It's a cloak that they would wear. And what was special about it? Why would they wear it to synagogue? And why specifically on Shabbat? Because it only opened on the left-hand side, as a reminder to the people wearing it that it was not allowed to carry anything on Shabbat or use your right hand. Your left hand is the only one you would have access to, and the shul mantle covered your right. So here's another image where you could see this is the everyday dress. You still have these big ruffs, see, but it's smaller on the everyday, bigger on what was a Shabbat collar, and you have these mantles, which are cloaks, and the woman's carrying a big purse. This also dates from 1700 in Frankfurt. And here we have another image. These are separated by 100 years. This is 1700 and this is 1800. This is in Bohemia and this is in Vienna. And this woman, Franny Arnstein, gets a letter from the chief rabbi of Vienna telling her that he's really disappointed with her not showing her elbows or wearing this really gorgeous but very, let's say, see-through dress. I don't know. It's stunning. He's disappointed that he could see her curls, that she isn't covering her hair in the way of traditional Jewish women, which you could see here. This is a bride on her wedding day. Franny Arnstein is posing for her wedding portrait as well. This woman is covered in what's called a dektichel, which is this thing that's going to cover her face, a veil. Her mother and her mother-in-law, I'm not sure which one is which, are wearing these massive ruffs, these really humongous head coverings, as they're all preparing to go to the synagogue in the background for the wedding. Franny Arenstein has not just shed the ruff and the veil and all things that actually identify her as a Jew. We have something much more separate than that. And it's really what's happening in the world. What happens between 1700 and 1800 is what's going to make up the Jewish modern age. We go from being a people apart to a people that's slowly integrating into society, and we could see it from the dress. Franny Arenstein is the daughter of one of the first court Jews, and being a court Jew, they no longer have to live in the ghetto. They're allowed out of the ghetto. They're allowed to dress as they want. All the rules that applied to how you dress in the ghetto to not stand out, to be part of the Jewish community are suddenly stripped away. And you can be yourself, all on your own. You could stand out as a non Jew or maybe as part of society at large. And it's really interesting to see what happens. What I love here is people are commenting, Ellie B would love a shul mantle. We could get him one. I think that's possible. And Ari Kaiser loves the pictures. Uh, I think that when you consider the messages we all send out with what we wear, it's not hard to see how this has always been the case. The difference between these women and this woman is evident, and it continues to our day. We'll see pictures in the future of how people tell you who they are. They tell you how they practice their religion by what they're wearing, from the smallest detail to their wigs, to their non-wigs, to the kerchiefs they wear on their hair, to the dimensions of their kippah or the lack of kippah, to the shade of black of their trousers, to wearing trousers. It all sends a message. Clothing is vitally important. It is not frivolous. And we're always sending messages. My last image in my last minute is this, where all distinctions of clothing kind of disappear in the modern age. You can't tell a Dutch person from a French person from the way they dress. The only place you're going to find costumes really are at costume parties or circa 1983, me and my brother Boaz in Holland, in the town of Edam, which I got to visit recently, dressed as a little Dutch boy and a little Dutch girl. I think I'm slightly more convincing than he is, but the power of dress to send a message is universal, and it's as old as time. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know. Tune in again when we continue our discussion on the history of Jewish dress, and I'll see you all soon. Take care. Oh my goodness, that was a lot of fun. Yikes. Oh, wow. Bye-bye, everyone. It wasn't updating. I had to stop. Oh my God. Hi.
Hey.
Adam.
How you doing? Is it finished?
Yeah.
Finished it. Oh, I just saw it went private and unavailable, so I just wanted to make sure that was where you were at. And you wanted that to happen. Cool.
Oh my God, I had to pause in the middle to refresh the page.
Yeah, I saw that.
Hopefully we got it all in the stream.
Huh?
Hopefully we got it all in the stream. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. But you said you got a chance to say goodbye to everyone and say thank you for streaming in, right?
Yeah, I said, see you all soon. We're going to do this again.
Amazing. Wait 1 second. Let me just switch my Wi-Fi. So what's cool now, publish to YouTube, and then that video you can now send to whoever you want who might want to watch it, and to keep circulating it. Sorry, it was a very stressful day. I thought you did really, really well.
Thanks. Well, we didn't have as many viewers as before, as your guys got, but that's okay.
As Moshe did. Well, I think it's like there's a lot to the lessons that like we need to like pick up from today. I've been messaging Ari a lot, and I'm just like, it's hard, like we don't have many subscribers on YouTube, but what we do have is like everyone has a lot of reach, has a lot of people they know, so we need to be much better about promoting these streams if we're going to do them.
Ari only put the advert out at 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I did tell him as well is that 2 streams a day is a lot.
Oh my God, it's humongous.
Yeah. So even if we're doing 1 a day, that's like still a lot. But because the more the fewer we do, the more we can promote the ones we're doing.
Yeah. Wow. I am.
But also,
sweating.
like the fact that that's like saved now, and that's like.
Oh my God. I talk almost every night of the week.
Yeah,
I do.
That was intense, right?
That was. Also, no one's responding to you, and I have 2 computers running, and Daniel was on the phone somewhere else the whole time.
Ellie was saying on the all-staff group that you need to teach people how to do lighting because your lighting is so much better than everyone else's.
I used to be an interior designer.
Yes, your stream looked great. Your room looks great. Everything looks great. As far as the actual stream, once we had it running, I am like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want it to look like, what I want it to sound like. The length was right. The way you talked about it, the way you introduced it.
I was like, it's 45
everything about it.
I saw the time. It was 45 minutes. I'm like, I'm stopping here.
Yeah. I think that was great. I think, gosh, it's really hard because like everyone's trying to play catch up. Suddenly we've been launched into this new direction, and it's one where like building up viewership and growing up viewers online, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or whatever it is like it's a very slow and very like kind of methodical process, and it's just we've tried to hit the ground running. We've like dived right into the deep end.
Like on Facebook, my viewership is much bigger. Like I have a very steady view. Like I got 5,000 hits for the video I put up this morning.
Cool. So the question that I have is like, what audience are you trying to hit with that? Is your primary audience on Facebook younger people, or is it kind of middle-aged?
That's right. This is a different audience.
Yeah.
Which is fine, and it's fine to try a different audience.
Well, as far as Aish is concerned, Aish's demographic is campus YPs, that age group. So I was having this conversation a lot with people today because a lot of people were saying, why aren't we just focusing on Facebook? Why aren't we just doing Facebook? And outside of what's happened in the last few days, we've been really trying behind the scenes, Ari and Laurie and Aaron and Sophia, we're really trying to push and focus now on, YouTube and Instagram. Any, like, the places on Facebook in recent years.
Yeah.
So all that